I welcome everyone today as we gather, getting close to the celebration of New Year's, but on this Holy Family Sunday. I trust that your Christmas Eve, Christmas Day celebrations were all you wanted them to be. I know we had an absolute ball here at Joan of Arc. Those babies that I found on Christmas Eve and Christmas Day to bring up to the altar were, not that they aren't all wonderful, were stellar. I made that comment yesterday at the 5 o'clock Mass, and a young 17-year-old girl stepped up and said, I was one of those 17 years ago. So I said, yeah, I meant every single baby I've ever brought up. That's been incredible. And welcome today. I've always been a bit skeptical and told that the Holy Family was a model for all families. I would ask for those of us in the room who are perhaps a little more seasoned in age, if you might remember the depictions of this Holy Family, particularly on holy cards. They always appeared incredibly joyful. The threesome were always not without their halos, walking very happily down a path, oftentimes lined with flowers, seemingly as though they did not have a single care in the world. One would have good reason to be a bit skeptical of that particular image. The fanciful portrayal of Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, the trio, reminds me not one little bit of the family that I grew up in Nebraska. Not even remotely. While I grew up, yes, in a loving, and when I look back, a respectful home, I have absolutely no memories of similar strolls along the garden path with my parents, along with my older sister and my younger brother. But you should keep in mind, after all, I grew up in Nebraska, which you will recall is not for everyone. We were lucky to even have a tree, let alone a flower-strewn path. Both of my parents, from what I remember from the very beginning, always worked at least 2 jobs. They would own a business and work for other businesses. My mother would keep a set of books for several businesses in town. They worked hard. My brother and I have talked about that as we look back in terms of what would be one of the legacies that we received from them. Their work ethic, for better or for worse at times, is certainly part of their legacy. We didn't have a lot of time to take leisurely walks down a path. And I really didn't develop my halo until much later in life, which allows me to no longer need to go to the barber. I can do it myself. I can only imagine how this fanciful image must contrast with everyday experience of parents who are, in today's world, living out their day-to-day commitment to each other and to their children they have brought into this world. As we heard from our speaker today, the challenges of what it is to have children, and when one is ill and needs to stay home on a Sunday morning, all the ups and the downs of what it is to be parents in the modern world. The idealized holy card version of the Holy Family fails to reflect both the context as well as the tensions experienced, in fact, by Jesus, Mary, and Joseph, as they contended with many challenges of their life at that time. While it is impossible to know the exact intimate details of the Holy Family's life, I think we can say today with certainty it was far from idyllic. In today's gospel, an angel warns Joseph in a dream to take Mary and Jesus and flee to Egypt, because the local despot, Herod, was seeking to kill Jesus. So we can see their life was less than ideal. The fear, the uncertainty, the danger that drove Jesus, Mary, and Joseph out of their own country to need to say goodbye to family and friends that they depended on and loved. What it was to have to flee their homeland out of fear. Sounds familiar. These are not unlike conditions that face many of our brothers and sisters today who seek safety, a life of dignity, far from their native country. According to the United Nations Refugee Agency, there are 70 million people today that are displaced by violence, economic need, and persecution. On this Feast of the Holy Family, we are challenged to look beyond holy card depictions of the Holy Family and reflect on a reality that is all too present in our modern day world. As I had asked far too long ago to have one candle burning on the altar, a sign of hope for children, and one candle not burning to remind us in this season always for the work of Christmas, to continually work for, be positive about, and do all in our power to make sure that children are reunited. And regardless of what progress has been made, we continue to need to keep children either at our southern border or around the world, recognizing again the unsafe world that children live in. A holy card depiction of a Holy Family that will never ever leave my mind has to do with the father and the child from El Salvador, 25-year-old Oscar Ramirez, and his not quite 2-year-old daughter Valeria, who in an attempt to find a new life, safety, against all risk, continue to make that effort made and drowned as a result of their desire in the Rio Grande River. A depiction of a Holy Family that is far from what we oftentimes think about. One of the very first pastoral gestures which Pope Francis began his pontificate was to visit a very small island in the Mediterranean. It is on this island that desperate refugees and migrants from Libya, from Sub-Saharan Africa, continue seeking shelter, trying to cross the sea as best they can, and hopefully arrive in Europe. Many die in the crossing on very flimsy and overloaded boats. It was here that the Pope spoke of the globalization of indifference in regard to the suffering and death of so many displaced persons in our world. The globalization of indifference. I often refer to that as you're stuck in the bleachers. But to a world to come to a place of that level of indifference. People trying to seek refuge from war-torn Syria, from religious persecution in Thailand, and fear of death from violent gangs in Central America. It is all around us. In reflecting on the plight of the Holy Family described in the Gospel, we are challenged to see our brothers and our sisters living under deplorable conditions in refugee camps in Greece, in overloaded holding facilities along our southern border, or dangerously overloaded boats crossing the Mediterranean, It is in these situations that we see the very presence of Christ. This is, after all, a primary revelation of Christmas. The incarnation of God in the weak and the defenseless and in the mistreated. We are invited to enter into this ministry of Christmas by sharpening our perception of the reality of the Holy Family 2,000 years ago, which was anything but a gentle stroll down a path. And to see that same presence of Christ in today's Holy Family. As Francis has reminded us, and I quote, "The change of attitude towards migrants and refugees is needed on the part of everyone, moving away from attitudes of defensiveness and fear, indifference and marginalization, which are all typical of an attitude of a throwaway society. A society that is more than willing to pump out more lies than one can imagine. We struggle as a throwaway society. We need to make this transition to attitudes based on a culture of encounter. The only culture capable, the only culture that will ever be able to build a better, more just, and loving world. The work of Christmas is there for us. Amen.